Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Audit and Pensions Committee. I'm Councillor Ian Cassidy, the chair of the committee. We're being streamed live on YouTube, so just to remind everybody, just to keep the broadcast nice and clear, if everyone keeps their microphone on mute when they're not speaking, and also officers and any guests, if you want to just introduce yourself before speaking for the first time, just so everybody knows who you are in terms of people in the committee and for the public out there watching us. And first item, we've got no apologies for absence. We have a full house tonight. So what I will do is go through a roll call of the members of the committee. If you just say present and note any declarations of interest. If you have no declarations of interest, then just say present. So in no particular order, Councillor Caleb Landy.
Present.
Councillor Harvey.
Present.
Councillor Murphy.
Present.
Councillor Carmel. Do we have a Councillor Carmel there?
Oh, sorry, you faded out for a moment. Present, and for the purposes of open transparency, I am a deferred member of the LBHF pension scheme.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Thorley?
Present.
Excellent. Just so we would normally do the minutes from the previous meeting, but I was just going to suggest to save time, because obviously we want to, we're heading into the Pensions Committee shortly after this. Are we happy to just do a general agreement and we can deal with any matters arising at the next meeting of the Audit Committee, which is just next week? Is everyone happy with that? I'm noticing some
Agreed.
Heads being nodded in assent. So we'll move on to the main item for this evening, which is the Statement of Accounts 2019-2020. We're joined by Paul Dossett and Ellen Millington from Grant Thornton. And I'll ask Emily Hill to introduce the paper and get us started.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, today we are taking an item on the Council's Statement of Accounts for the financial year. Sorry, I'm not on video. For the financial year 1920. That means it's the year ending the 31st of March 2020. We would usually take this, you would usually take this earlier in the year, and that is as a result of the COVID pandemic, where the deadlines for the preparation of the statutory accounts were put back to enable local authorities to deal with the pandemic as a priority. So what you have in front of you this evening is the full statement of accounts, which sets out the outturn position for the council, as has been reported to Cabinet during the year. That outturn was affected at the end of the year, at the very end of the year, by the COVID pandemic. As the lockdown hit those last couple of weeks, it did affect it more than we thought, but it actually affects the disclosures throughout the report, as it does lead to significantly more uncertainty at that point in time on the 31st of March 2020 around valuation of assets, both investment assets and physical property, plant and equipment. So the statement of accounts has a set format that is required under legislation, and these accounts therefore follow that format. Happy to take any questions on those accounts. You'll know that as part of an important part of local authority governance is that our accounts are independently audited, so you don't have to take my word for it. You're informed by the views of the auditor as to whether these accounts provide a true and fair view of our position, our financial position at year end. So you also have, along with this pack, our audit findings report, which is the work from Grant Thornton, which will identify any issues arising from the audit to date, and any issues outstanding, our annual governance statement, and also our pension fund annual report. I've mentioned COVID already, but it's worth mentioning again. As set out in the audit findings report, this audit has been challenging this year in relation to COVID and auditing remotely. Whereas the deadline for the statement of accounts is the 30th of November, it is expected that we will not be able to achieve that deadline because there are a number of issues outstanding that we're still working on with the auditor on at the moment. And Paul can probably pick up some of those issues as well as he talks through his audit findings report. I think it's important to bring this here now to the audit committee in advance of that deadline to understand the work that's been undertaken and the issues that we are looking to resolve. Don't necessarily expect any significant changes to the accounts. So within the recommendations is a delegation to the chair to approve the accounts, but obviously it'd be up to the chair as to whether you believe that we need to come back to the audit committee should any final amendments be required that we want to have additional discussion at the audit committee on. So perhaps if I leave it at that, Chair, and ask Paul to pick up anything on the audit.
Thank you, Emily. Ellen will just take us through the highlights of the report in a minute. So just as a sort of preamble, yes, because of the impact of COVID, very challenging environment for producing accounts and auditing accounts. As we stand tonight, roughly speaking, Grant Thornton have signed off about 20% of our total portfolio nationally. And I think from what we hear, we might be slightly ahead of some of the other firms. So just reflection on the environment that we've had to work in, which has been extremely challenging. And we want to move back to the normal form of audit as well as we can next year. I think the wider context of this audit has also been the regulatory environment that auditors exist in. So we are strongly regulated by the Financial Reporting Council to focus on the big numbers in your accounts, and the big numbers, if not necessarily the most important numbers, are your property, plant and equipment, asset valuations, and your pension liability valuation. And we've spent a considerable amount of time on these areas, and we still have some work to do on those. So that's probably all I'd say by way of a preamble, and Ellen will take us through the highlights of the report.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Ellen Millington. I'm the audit manager from Grant Thornton. So the audit findings report presents members with our audit findings to date against the significant risk areas which we identified in our audit plan that was brought to the last meeting. So as Emily and Paul have both mentioned, our audit is still ongoing at the moment. So there's two kind of main reasons for that from our perspective. The first one is there's a list on page 5 of our report of some outstanding information that our team is working with the finance team at the council to resolve within the next week. So we're reasonably confident that that's kind of normal audit work that we would normally be doing. As has been highlighted, it's just taken a little bit longer than normal to work through that in the remote working environment, and also as Paul has mentioned, the increased regulatory scrutiny, just meaning that some of our sample sizes are more detailed and things like that this year than they have been in previous years. The most significant issue which we would draw to attention is described on page 3, and it's mentioned a couple of times throughout the report as well. So this relates to one of the investments which is held by the pension fund. So this is really what we're working through to try and obtain a bit more information to understand the impact of this on the council's financial statements in terms of the net pension liability, but also on the pension fund financial statements in terms of the valuation of the investments which are held there. We've discussed this quite extensively, both with Emily and with Phil and with Matt, and they've provided us with useful context, and we're still receiving more information. We received some more information this afternoon from the investment fund themselves about the situation which is ongoing there. But because obviously these are external third parties that we're dealing with, they have confidentiality requirements, and it's just taking us a bit more time to resolve that issue. So that's the issue which is really driving at the moment kind of any delay to the conclusion of the audit process from our perspective. In terms of our work around other significant risk areas, as Paul mentioned, there's still a few queries outstanding around property valuation for council dwellings. But other than that, we anticipate that the majority of these issues will be closed this week, and we don't expect any further significant changes to the financial statements. This is also the reason why on the agenda for this meeting there was draft letter of representation as one of the items. So that's something which, because of the outstanding bits that we've still got to resolve, hasn't been tabled today. But we would suggest that the chair could agree this outside of the meeting if the committee approves delegating authority to the chair for approval of the financial statements as well. Another area to highlight, as Emily mentioned, there is some there have been in relation to valuation of land and buildings and property and infrastructure investments in the pension fund. The valuers of these funds have declared material valuation uncertainties, which are as a result of low levels of market activity in the sector due to COVID-19. So these have been disclosed in the financial statements, and we will make reference to those disclosures in our audit opinions as well. This is not a qualification of the audit opinion, and we're seeing it in every single set of local authority financial statements this year and across the wider public sector as well. So that's not something to be overly concerned about. It's just some extra wording in our audit opinion that will appear this year comparative to previous years. The other ongoing issue which we have mentioned in our report, which might result in a change to the financial statements, is the resolution of the legal case relating to Thames Water, which is described on page 15 of this report. So again, that's affecting the majority of local authorities in London, and we're just working through the specific impacts for Hammersmith and Fulham at the moment. The report generally also reflects some of the financial challenges which are faced by the council in respect of COVID-19. So this is particularly in relation to the narrative around our value for money conclusion for the council, which is on pages 20 to 30 of the report. We're proposing an unqualified value for money conclusion, but in this narrative we've recommended here that the council carefully considers longer term financial sustainability in the context of its shorter term decision making, such as setting council tax levels. And this is clearly written within the context of a wider financial challenge across the whole local authority sector, with real caution needed in terms of financial resilience. So not only in terms of COVID-19 and the longer term impact being a huge unknown at this stage, so on longer term behaviours of the local population and demand for services, but also Brexit and the 1 year spending review and finance settlement, which is forthcoming as well. So I think I'll stop there. That's all I was really going to say, but we are happy to take any questions on our audit report or on the audit in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if there's any further comments from any of the officers, or if we're happy to just dive into questions. I can see that Councillor Carmel has a virtual hand up. Oh, I think you're still on mute.
Sorry, I put the hand down instead of taking the mute off. Two very quick questions. The first one, I expect a very short answer. We've all watched in horror events unfolding in Croydon. Can I have your assurance that we are absolutely nowhere near a Section 114 notice? If that's the right section.
I just want to check, Councillor Carmel, whether you're asking me or the auditors.
Both.
Okay. No. The council. My view is no. I'm nowhere near issuing a Section 114 notice. I think the value for money narrative that the auditors have put within this report is a good and comprehensive review, really, of where our financial situation is. Clearly, we have had some financial issues as a result of COVID-19. We're managing those very carefully, and we are forecasting what that might mean for us in our future budget gap. Having said that, as moment, and as has been reported to Cabinet, we're actually only looking at this moment, although it changed very quickly with COVID, as of an actual in-year 2.5 million hit to our outturn at the moment in relation to COVID, but we're doing a lot of work to try to reduce other expenditure. So at the moment, there's no significant unmanageable in-year effect of COVID this financial year, and we're looking and planning towards the next financial year at balancing next year's budget. So we're not looking at any significant draw on reserve that we wouldn't be able to manage either this year or next. The report's quite right in that we do not have significantly high levels of reserves, but we certainly have a good cushion at the moment to manage the effects of COVID or any other sort of unexpected events. So it's exactly what reserves are for, and we will need to, as part of our medium-term planning, reinstate any reserves that we draw down over the medium term. But at the moment, I'm satisfied that the council has the resources that it needs to manage its current risks and its liabilities.
Thank you. Ms. Millington, would you concur with that?
I think I'll defer to Paul to respond to that question.
Mr. Dossett.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I think it's a good question. I think I would say the Croydon Public Interest Report that we issued is a good checklist of things not to do in the council. So we don't think you are doing these things at this juncture, but it's a helpful sort of checklist to ensure you don't do some of those things going forward. I think we wouldn't be issuing an unqualified value for money conclusion if we had the sorts of concerns that we clearly had at Croydon. So at this point in time, we are assured that you are not in that direction. But as Emily has said, as our report has said, it's a risky environment for local authorities at the moment.
Thank you. I'm grateful to everyone for that answer. And just to make sure that I'm up to date, since it was mentioned in the presentation, can you give me an update of exactly where we are with the Thames Water legal case?
I can give you a high level update. There is some information on, gosh, let me find the right page. There is some information within the report. In terms of exactly where we are still working out the detail. In October, Kingston, who was essentially the test case, was unsuccessful. So Kingston's test case challenge has been unsuccessful. We understand at the moment it's unlikely to take that any further now. So we now need to consider what that means for the council and the policy. London councils continue to work together to look at that. So Kingston's case is unsuccessful, and I would say that's exactly where we are at the moment. We're now considering the implications of that judgment.
I'm grateful to you for that update, because the information I heard was Kingston was looking at possible appeals. So if you're informing me that they have abandoned that is news and puts a new dynamic on that. Thank you very much.
I think just for a quick bit of clarification, it's page 160 using the council's numbering of the report, page 15 of the audit report. It's the Grant Thornton report itself, just if anyone wants to have a look. That's the page it mentions. So page 160 by the council's numbering.
Now, is that page 160 in the grey or 160 in the black?
In the black, it should be on the narrow edge of the page. Under the heading Significant Findings, Matters Discussed with Management.
Well, on page 160 of my agenda, it's financial performance.
Oh, good.
Just going to a different numbered page 160. Can I just say, Chair, that having 3 sets of numbers on the printed page when you're trying to find the relevant page, and the agenda actually only arrived on my doorstep yesterday, so I haven't given it the general amount of scrutiny that I would normally do. But that's by the by. If we could have a common set of numbering and always refer to that one, it would make life for me much easier. And although you may not wish to do that, I would appreciate it.
Oh, we'll take that on board. Thank you. I've noticed a virtual hand up from Emily.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I guess just to clarify, at the moment, I think all London boroughs, because Kingston did lose the case, it was the test case, but it was the case was being taken forward through a group of London boroughs, from a group of London boroughs. I'm not sure that it is currently all of those London boroughs' position that it won't continue to take that forward, and so I'm not sure that it is over at the moment, and all the London boroughs are currently considering that. Just to clarify, I think.
Thank you.
And do we have any other comments or questions from councillors? There we go. We may be finished perfectly in time for the pension committee in that case. I don't know if there's any final points from any of the officers. Obviously, we've got a fairly chunky list of recommendations. Obviously, the final recommendation is just to approve any further adjustments. Do we think there'll be much of that, or are things effectively set in stone, or not quite set in stone? But is there much further work to do after this point?
I can give a view, and auditors can disagree with me if they want to. I think that there is further work to do. I think Ellen mentioned that she didn't think that there was any significant changes on that work to do. I think we do need to get to the bottom of this recent legal case and determine what the correct accounting treatment should be for that at this moment in time, given there's continued uncertainty around that. That would be the area, if there are any amendments, where there will be amendments. So we could brief the committee on that. Otherwise, I don't expect there to be any significant amendments, but we'd obviously bring them to your attention if that were the case.
Thanks very much. Councillor Carmel.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just for clarification and to put it on the record, I have no problem with the recommendations. However, can I just have your personal assurance that recommendation 7, were you to exercise that discretion, that any such exercise of that discretion would be reported back to the committee?
Yes, no, happy to give that assurance. Happy to. We always enjoy strong, robust conversation in this committee. Unless there's any other questions or comments from councillors, which I'm not seeing any virtual hands, I'm seeing a few head shaking. So the recommendations are just for the purposes of the recording. So recommendations to note the content of the external auditor's audit findings report, including the auditor's findings, recommendations and the council's response to those recommendations, to approve the 2019-20 annual governance statement, which is included in the statements of accounts, to approve the 2019-20 management representation letter, to approve the statement of accounts for 2019-20, including the pension fund accounts, to approve the pension fund annual report 2019-20, to note that the accounts remain unaudited until final sign-off by the external auditor, and lastly, to delegate authority to the Chair of the Audit and Pensions Committee in consultation with the Director of Finance to approve any further adjustments to appendices 1, 3 and 4, which may be required as part of the completion of the audit work. A hand from Emily. Hello.
On mute.
Still on mute.
Like Boris.
Thank you. Just to point, as Ellen pointed out, because the audit work wasn't complete and we still need to complete that at least one significant area there. The management representation letter isn't in front of you today, so you're unable to approve that, and perhaps we could include that within the delegation in recommendation 7, that we and as Councillor Carmel has requested that we could also share virtually as and when we have that available.
Agreed.
That's fine. So I'm assuming we're all happy to agree those recommendations.
Noted, agreed and delegated.
Noted, agreed and delegated. Thank you very much. In which case, for those of us lucky enough to have the rest of the evening off, I hope everybody has a good evening. And thank you very much to Ellen and Paul for joining us. And thank you, I think, especially to our officers for dealing with an audit in fairly straitened circumstances. So to everybody else, enjoy your evening. For those in the pension committee, I will see you virtually in about 5 minutes in our new meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.